It was a particular evening, and I had had a really, really rough year that year. My father had died suddenly, and I was making 6 movies about unsolved murders. So it was a really, really rough subject. I had a production company. And so everything that could go wrong went wrong that year until I reached September the 9th. Because the first phone call absolutely brought me to my knees. And that was my accountant saying, you're going to be broke in 30 days. You've gone $2 million over budget on the movies, and I still had 1.5 to deliver. And then I hung up the phone, and as I hung up the phone, it rang again. It was my mother, and who was in a really bad way. So those 2 phone calls absolutely brought me to my knees, because I didn't feel that I could solve either problem. Like, I was so good at fixing things, but these 2 things, my mother was grief-stricken because my father had died earlier in the year, and so these 2 things I could not solve.
When I was 19, I ended up in a really abusive relationship, which I now see as sort of like the catalyst for my awakening in a way. There was at one point where he had hurt me, and I was in the bathroom. I had locked myself in the bathroom. And I looked in the mirror and I could hardly recognize myself, but all of a sudden it was as if the top of my head opened up and just this message poured in, and it was just like, Sheleana, you're gonna be speaking on stage to women about this one day. Like, this is what you're meant to be doing. And I saw myself doing that. And I remember actually telling him that. I said, I had this vision the other day that I'm actually gonna work with women who were in abusive relationships or, were in harmful places in their lives. And this is part of my path. So I think you should really get help, because this is gonna be talked about.
Starting at the beginning, my mum died when I was 7. My dad went to work when I was 17, never came back. He passed on a shipping disaster in England where the boat capsized, hundreds of people died. It was pretty horrific because it was all covered on the news by virtue of the event. It wasn't like he was by himself on a motorcycle or something, like it was a nationwide event. An only child, being orphaned at 17, that was obviously quite pivotal in ways that I didn't fully understand. What it did give me was the glimpse of the isolation.
Most recently, I'm about 6 months in recovery from postpartum depression, anxiety, and insomnia. At the lowest point, suicidal. And I was about 4 months into my postpartum, and that's when it came on, which is not typical. Usually it comes on earlier. I was at the darkest moment of my life. And I've been through a lot of dark moments. I've been in sober recovery for 14 years. I've remembered trauma, but like this scenario was by far rocked me to my core, brought me to my knees. But I stayed in constant contact with a higher power of my own understanding. I stayed in constant communication with that inner guidance system through prayer. And even though the prayers weren't making it go away, the prayers were guiding me to the doctors, the medication, the healers, whatever it was that I needed to get back to baseline.
I had this big, huge life change where, my mom passed away and then going through this huge breakup. Everything kind of happened at the same time. My mom was always so healthy. And when we found out she had cancer, she was gone in 6 weeks. And so it was just like, oh my God, anything and everything can happen in this life. And I ended up, moving out on my own. I went through this big breakup with my partner at the time. I became a single mom. And it was something like I never thought was going to happen to me. Again, half of my family's from the Philippines, where divorce is still illegal.
Like, you just hit a breaking point, and something does change in a moment. It always changes in a moment, and it's up to you to get to that moment. So what can we do to get to that moment with routines, practices, disciplines? How do we get there? Because there's got to be, there's always something that leads up to it.
Your breakdowns are just going to keep getting bigger until you wake the fuck up and get the lesson that the universe is sending. I mean, period. It took me a long time to see that I had a very painful pattern of being drawn to really big personality people who were really fun and edgy and just like, wow, like a shiny object. And then, you know, when you're having fun with this kind of person and you're laughing all the time and they're really edgy and you start to realize, oh my God, they're actually kind of mean to people, or they lie, or they do this. Now all of a sudden I get scared because I don't know how to back away. And time and time and time and time, like I can go all the way back to friends in elementary school, to a babysitter that I once hired, to business associates back in the day, to like just there they are. And it wasn't until I had a massive issue happened with one of them that was super painful that made me go, holy shit, this is a pattern. This person has been showing up in your life since you were 9 years old.
And so I just collapsed in despair. And that moment of collapsing in despair was the moment where my life would change forever. Because my daughter, my adult daughter, saw me and just walked out and handed me this book, which was from 1910, and said, read this, it'll help. And I mean, I've asked her since, why did you give me that book? And she's like, I don't know. You know, she just didn't know. She was just, and the way that she gave it to me was almost kind of robot-like, do you know, like just handing it. What's even weirder is that with the sky falling in after the 2 phone calls, is that I read the book.
Right. You made time for the book.
I just sat down right there and then, and I opened it up and I started reading, and all my tears were hitting the pages. The ink was running, and 90 minutes later I'd finished reading it, and oh my gosh, I just had the biggest realization. Of course, the book was the trigger, and the book is called The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles, and it's available for free on our website if anybody wants to download it, thesecret.tv.
It was a year and a half ago where I first spoke on stage about that exact moment.
Wow.
And it was really full circle for me. So I sort of got that download really early, and then I still had to go through all this other stuff and mess up a lot in my relationships and be on both sides of it, you could say. So I feel like I've just been gathering that wisdom. And then when I was 25-ish, I got married to somebody who was from another country, and we were best friends. And I was like, okay, well, we don't really want to be together long term, but even if we don't stay together, like I want you to be able to be here. And so, you know, being a naive 20-something, we got married, and then that all fell apart. It was very much ended in deep betrayal towards me. Wow. And I lost everything in that process. Wow. Everything, all my money, my business, my reputation, like everything, I was just torn apart. But there was a really beautiful thing that happened in that, which was all of the pain I was feeling. I was also getting all of these flashbacks of my childhood, or memories of things that I kind of thought I had worked through, where I was like, oh wow, this is not dealt with at all. And so I had this moment of realization, like all of this stuff that I'm feeling, it actually doesn't have anything to do with him. Like I don't need him to do anything. I don't need him to come back. I don't need him to fix it. I don't even need him to stop doing what he's doing. I just need to go get right with me and my inner child. And so then I met a spiritual teacher, and then I worked with him for 4.5 years in transpersonal therapy, Course in Miracles, Jungian shadow work, and depth psychology. So that was sort of the catalyst. So it's all kind of come from a lot of pain, but it really led me to a beautiful path. So
my experience of separation was very visceral, because it was literal in terms of like, I am by myself. It wasn't like I'm in a relationship like a lot of people are. They could even be married, but they feel lonely, or they feel isolated, or they could have a family, but they feel somehow, you know, discarded by the family, so they feel separated that way. But they have a family. I didn't have any of it. So at the time, it was just very painful, and I didn't really know how to process, certainly my mum when I was 7. But then in hindsight, I was like, wow, I think much of it was so that I could get to the place of really having such a profound compassion for every human being's ego, which by design is the experience of separation. So I had the visceral experience, the literal experience, so that I really could fully relate when people feel like they're not loved, they're not good enough, they're not, valued, whatever it is, because those are, I would assert, aspects of the isolated ego. But my quote unquote, awakening was just over 20 years ago. I was sitting in a rent control apartment in Santa Monica, everything that I possessed in this 200 square foot space. And I'd gone through a breakup with a girl who, at the time, in my understanding of love, was somebody that I loved. But she left me, and I sort of fell apart and couldn't sleep and lost weight. And I was calling all my, guy friends, like, how do I get it back? And
the reason that it was the darkest moment was because it was my first taste of really understanding what mental illness is. While I've been in sober recovery for a long time, and I struggled with addiction when I was in my 20s and remembered, dissociated traumas, and those scenarios in my life were probably considered mental illness from the standpoint of being depressed or having to anesthetize through drugs or alcohol. But I'd never experienced the type of mental illness that was causing panic attacks, that was causing insomnia, that was causing me to say on Mother's Day, I want to kill myself. And here I was, I had authored 7 self-help books, and I was suicidal. So I'm so deeply grateful for that dark bottom, because now I can speak to mental illness with so much conviction and authority and most importantly, authenticity. And I can see how when people come to me in my audiences, and for years they'd say I'm depressed or I have this biochemical issue, and my response was probably part of the stigma. I would say things like, well, just meditate more, but without the level of awareness of where these kinds of conditions can take you, I wasn't in a position to be able to speak to medication and how you could use medication to go deeper on your spiritual path if you needed to, and to really honor that side of the conversation.
I think that when my mom passed, I looked at everything in my life and just became it's like I woke up. I just feel like I hit rock bottom, Danica. I would go and cry in the closet. I look at everything. And then I just started to rebirth. And one of the things that came out of that is Seluna. So when you think about what is Seluna, it means the sun and the moon. So it means the light and the dark. So I started looking at everything differently. Don't run away from hard feelings. Don't think it's just about the food. It's this idea of everything's all together in the pot, and we are whole, and everything's in the part of us too. So, the dark is where seeds start to germinate and grow. And shamans talk about the dark being necessary for transformation. You go into the dark, you go into those hard feelings, and then you grow.
I really sort of fell apart. I had these annoying questions like, will I see her again? Is she dating somewhere else? Where is she? Will I have love like that ever again? All of these questions that were just literally quite unanswerable until the moment where I got the answer to all of them. And it was so cathartic and it was so profound that the answer was 3 words: I don't know. And at that moment, will I see her again? Where is she? Is she with someone else? Will I have love like that? Whatever the question was, the accurate answer at that moment, given time, literally was, I don't know. And when I got that, I realized, wow, that's the nature of life. I really got the fabric of the universe in terms of the linear progression of time through human being is complete uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. The ego, by virtue of the fact that it's living within a container of fear, is always trying to figure it out, because it wants to survive. So you've got this complete contradiction now of life is uncertain, but the ego wants certainty. And therein lies suffering. So right at that moment, I realized not only the answer to all my questions, but that gave me access to the actual fabric of life, which is uncertainty. But for the first time in my life, I was totally okay with it.
I hope you're not as stubborn as I am, because it took me 41 years to see the lesson about toxic behavior that I was attracted to and toxic behavior that I engaged in my own people pleasing and inability to draw a line and distance myself or end relationships that really didn't work. And I know they don't work because I get that feeling in my stomach, and then I see myself twisting myself in knots so as to not upset somebody who's basically crazy. And I'm now turning all around to not upset the person that is, I'm afraid of their reaction because they're not regulated in terms of their emotions. And so it took me a long time. And so I want you to understand, if you're listening to this, that if you're in a frustrating situation, I want you to ask yourself, number one, when in my life have I felt like this before? And who has made me feel like this? What situations have made me feel like this? And start listing them. And when you see one, you'll see another, and then another, and then another. And then there's that boss, and then there's a situation. And then you'll ask yourself, what is it that I'm doing that is having me show up in this situation again? And so I identified kind of the personality pattern that I was drawn to: fun, unpredictable, like life of the party, like kind of like just, woo, this feels fun and this feels on edge because I can't predict what's going to happen because this person's so entertaining, only to realize, holy shit, the same thing that drew me in is what's scaring me now and turning me into a massive people pleaser that makes me go crazy. If you can identify that, then you ask yourself, what is the lesson that life is trying to teach me?
I drove to my mother straight away the next morning and I told her everything I discovered. So I got her all set and a whole new world had opened up for her. And then I went back, continued with the research, and in January of 2005, I walked into my team and I said, we are going to make, it wasn't a documentary at that stage or a movie, or I didn't know what it was. We are going to make something that will change the world.